Okay, so I've pulled this. I've worked on the shaping. A couple of things that you need to be aware of. If you get a thin spot anywhere along here, and then it gets thick again afterwards, that's going to make it bend wrong. It's going to make it more likely to tear off. So if that happens, you need to basically restart. A lot of people like to put a groove down the center. This groove does the same thing that like the groove down a sword or knife does. It makes the reduces the weight while maintaining the strength, kind of like a girder thing. I like the handles to be fairly delicate looking where they attach. I don't like big blobs down there, so I like my handles to get pretty thin. The other thing is, we call it pulling a handle, but you don't only pull. So you're shaping it as you pull it, but you're also shaping it as you push back up. So you need to do a little bit of both, particularly if you get a thin spot right here, and it's not so thin that it's going to tear. You just push some of that clay up to thin it, and then you can start pulling it down and stretching it again. All right, so you also want to make sure that this whole surface, right before you're getting ready to attach, is slipped down. There's no finger marks, fingerprints anywhere along there. That it's pulling straight off of the picture and not off to one side or the other. It's you check several times to make sure it's opposite the spout, because it's really lame to have it all perfect and done and then realize it's not directly opposite the spout. And then I grab down here, and well, first you see if it's going to be tipping at about, if it's going to be bending the way you want it to. In general, I like mine to go up a bit. Now, what's wrong with that one?
It looks terrible.
It's got a nice gentle curve except for one point where it's got a corner.
Yeah.
Corners are ugly, right? And so part of that's because it was thick here, and this part is also getting stiffer as it's drying out because it's attached to a dry piece, and I had that kind of hanging there for a while when the bell rang and I was getting up doing other things while walking around with that. And so it's bending all at one spot and it looks crappy. So instead of popping that up there and then going, I wonder if I can do this, and if I do this, then maybe it'll look better after I do a whole bunch of other ugly garbage to it. So don't. You just take it off and cut off this part with your needle tool and start over. And it's much easier than trying to fix it when even a little thing like that was mostly good, but it had one problem, and the problem was no longer fixable. So the problem, the best way to get the problem to go away is to get the handle to go away and start again. So you take that off, smooth out any bits where you attach stuff. The nice thing is this clay where it's attached has already started to soften, so your next attachment is going to be not need quite so much encouragement. If your pot's already on the soft side, then that's not an issue. But I tend to not have the time to get the handle pulled until it's sat out for a while after I trimmed, and so it tends to be a little bit on the hard side, particularly up near the top where it dries out faster, where your attachment goes. So that tends to be a benefit for me, where if you're pulling it a little bit soft, then it might be the opposite. Also get your metal rib. Grab your rib when you're done. Okay, so I'm going to take my metal rib and scrape along here so that it's at least where the handle isn't going to be covering. Like this little dent in there is no biggie, but the other ones where it's going to show around the edge, I don't want to have to smooth that out later. It's easier to do now. So smooth out the whole thing. Get it all ready. This is a polishing sponge. Does some of that quite nicely. We only have one of these, so it's not like it's part of your kit, but you can borrow it. We've got several of these rubber ribs. They work quite well. So you can get that all pertified, and then ready to pull my new handle. So set that aside for a minute and grab some clay. This was the clay that I was started to roll out. You want to make sure that the wedging table's all clean. I like to roll out more clay than I'm going to need, because sometimes this sort of a thing happens. It's got that little wonky bit on the ends, and so you don't want to have that as part of your handle and try and smooth that over and have weak spots. So I always roll more than I need and cut off the ends. So if while you're rolling out your coil you tend to get it all flat because you press too hard, it happens more when your clay is a little on the soft side, but a little on the soft side for pulling a handle means it's more likely to, you're more likely to tear it in half, but you're less likely to have it crack as it bends. You want it to be plastic. This is a little softer, so it makes it a little bit harder to pull, but less likely to have those ugly cracks that you get when you're pulling it incorrectly. Okay, so got my carrot shape thing going. This is about as long as I want my handle to be, which means it's way too much clay, because I'm going to flatten this and stretch it quite a bit as I pull it. So I chop off this whole end up here, probably to about there, and set that aside. Then I'm going to chop this end off, at least there. Probably still too much. So I'm going to roll this just a little more. And that's looking a little more appropriate. Right down here at the end, I can chop this bit off. And then up here, I'm going to compress this and shape it in just a sec. So I've got a little bit there, but I'm not going to trim it off just yet. Then it's round, and I want it kind of flat, right? So, whee! Problem solved. Now it's flat, but it's only flat on one side. So I flip it to the other side. Guys, you should be watching this. Wheels off, sinks off, all of that other stuff. Okay, so I'm pressing down on those edges so that the profile of this is kind of almond or eye-shaped. His was a lot sharper. In his demo, you can have it be sharper or more rounded. I think rounded is going to go a little bit better with this one, although it has those sharp edges, so either one would work. Now, most people pull the handle straight off of the cup. I like to pull mine they go up a little bit. So when your hand is attaching, when the handle is attaching to your hand, or not attaching, but when you're holding the handle, where it attaches, if it curves down and then it comes up a little bit and then comes back down the other side, when you're holding that, it's going to feel nice on your hand. If it has a point in there, your hand will kind of get wedged into there and it'll pinch your finger a little bit while you're holding it, particularly with a pitcher, which is actually going to have some weight when it's full. So you don't want to have that. It needs to either be straight off or curve up a little bit. So I don't pull mine straight off the handle, I pull it a little bit upward, which means that I have to adjust my attachment just a bit to be at a little bit of an angle. Not quite that much. So I'm going to cut that off at my angle. And then for any good joint, you need three things. What are they?
Slip and score.
Slip, score, and compress. Compression. So I'm going to compress this at the end. What that's going to do is thicken this a little bit so that when I attach it, I'm not going to be tempted to pinch too thin right as I'm attaching it. I've got that extra bulk that I can use to blend in those edges. So when I'm blending in those edges, I'm not pinching it too thin. And then it's compressing it. It also, if you do it right, if you tap more in the center than on the edges, makes it kind of curvy. Since you're attaching it to something curvy, that makes sense, right? So I'm going to push in here a little bit so that that joint is going to look about right. A little more out here, a little more tapping. Okay, now when it comes to slipping and scoring, this needs very little help, just a little bit of water. So I put that on with a brush and then it's lightly scoring it at the same time, little added bonus. This, depending on how hard it is, depends on how much effort it's going to need, how much help it's going to need to stick. Because I just pulled one off and I softened it as I was pulling it off the first time, this doesn't need an awful lot. I'm still going to use the toothbrush, which is a little bit stiffer than my paintbrush bristles, and just go in nice circles for 2 minutes. Okay, then you attach this part here, and make sure as you're attaching it that it's completely opposite. I don't like mine to hit the rim. I like it to be below the rim, so I'm attaching it a little bit lower. And as I'm looking at this, I might even want this curve to continue up into that curve. I think that might look nicer, match my form better, so I'm going to scoot this down even more than I had it originally, just so that that complements the form a little bit better. I think that's going to help solve some of my problem, give me a little more of what I was looking for in my first one. So, blend these sides down and in. Lots of compression, a little bit of moisture to smooth it out. I take the handles of my round tools often and I will push down and roll right on that edge, and that will blend it nice and thoroughly so that that seam is blended outward, but it's not like blended like the size of my fat fingers blended, but blended a little more gracefully. Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to spend all of the time to get this prettified before I do anything else. Again, you're going to make sure you don't have this on crooked, or if there's a lopsided piece, if there's a little more clay over here than over here, then you can grab a little piece and do that. Any of that fixing that needs to happen now, rather than later when you've got everything else finished. Once you finish the handle, you don't touch it. Once you've attached the bottom side, you don't touch the handle again. You just blend this edge and you can maybe touch up that top seam a little bit, but you don't want to touch anywhere else on the handle because it'll leave big gooey fingerprints that turn into big rough scratchy looking fingerprints and so on. Okay? So are there any questions? Alright, you can practice on any of these pieces of bisqueware or bone dry stuff that are here. The chucks, these half ones, and then there's a bunch of cups that I threw for the purpose. I got them bisque fired so that they're ready. So everything else.
Practice on this.
Yeah, you practice on these, pass it off, and then once you've passed that off, then you're ready to try it on a piece that you're going to care about, right? Where these ones you're not keeping it attached. You do need to add water to those. Obviously, they won't stay attached for long. They will fall off as they dry out, but you should be able to get them attached, and you'll know you're doing it right if they stay attached to that for long enough to pull your handle. Okay? All right, I'm going to finish pulling this one. You guys can get to work for that part.
No, I heard that leg.
So, yeah, get to work.
Stop.
What the freaking morning?